I was so proud of her. God, I was so proud. I remember standing in the parking lot of Eastwood Community College the night she got her associate's degree, holding a bouquet of carnations I'd bought from the gas station on Route 9 because the flower shop had already closed by the time I got off my shift. She didn't care about the flowers. She hugged me so tight my back cracked, and she laughed, and I thought, this is it. This is what all of it was for. That was 17 years ago. Last month, I got a text message from my daughter that said, and I am quoting this word for word because I screenshotted it and I have looked at it probably 100 times since. Mom, I need you to understand that Kevin's family is very traditional and formal. The rehearsal dinner and the ceremony are going to be filmed professionally. I think it would be better if you just watch the live stream from home. I'll send you the link. Please don't make this hard. Don't make this hard. I sat on the edge of my bed and read that message 4 times. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand, and I went to the kitchen and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and I stood at the sink looking out at the backyard, at the little garden I've been keeping since she was in middle school, and I just breathed. In and out. In and out. In and. And then I picked the phone back up and I started making calls. My name is Loretta. I'm 63 years old. I worked as a home health aide for 21 years, and before that I did housekeeping at the Hampton Inn off the interstate for 4 years. And before that I waitressed at Denny's while I was pregnant with my daughter, because her father had already decided that fatherhood wasn't something he was interested in pursuing. I have never once in my life asked anyone for a single thing I didn't earn. My daughter's name is Stephanie. She's 34 years old. She has my mother's cheekbones and her father's talent for disappearing when things get inconvenient. She got her bachelor's degree from a state university in Ohio, paid for partly by financial aid, partly by loans that I co-signed for, and partly by the money I'd been putting into a savings account since she was born. $11 a week for 18 years, then more when I could manage it. I never told her how much was in that account. I just told her I had been saving and that the money was for her future and that I was proud of her. When she got into the graduate program in Charlotte, she called me crying, the good kind of crying. I was at work. I stepped into a hallway closet so my patient wouldn't hear me, and I cried right along with her. She met Kevin 2 years into that program. I met Kevin exactly once, at her graduation, before she moved to Charlotte permanently. He was handsome and polite, and he shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye and said it was so nice to finally meet me. His parents were there too, his father in a navy blazer, his mother in a cream linen dress with a string of real pearls. They were warm enough. We took pictures. I wore the blue dress I'd bought at Cato, and I had my hair done at the salon on Maple. And I thought we all looked like a real nice group of people celebrating something real nice. That was the last time I was included in anything. It started slowly, the way these things always do. So slowly you convince yourself you're imagining it. She stopped calling on Sundays. That had been our thing for years. Sunday afternoon, she'd call while I was cooking, and we'd talk for an hour about nothing in particular, about her week and my patients and what was on TV and whether I'd finally gotten around to fixing the gutter on the back of the house. Those calls just stopped. She'd text instead. Short things. Thinking of you. Busy week. Talk soon. When I asked about coming to visit, there was always a reason. The apartment wasn't set up yet. Kevin's work schedule was unpredictable. They were traveling, they were renovating. There was always something. I told myself she was just busy. She was building a life. That's what I raised her to do. Then I called her one evening in February, and a woman answered. For a half second, I thought I'd dialed wrong, but then the woman said, "Oh, Mrs. Munna, Loretta." And I recognized the voice. It was her friend from college, Tamara, who I'd met twice at various events and who apparently was now comfortable enough in my daughter's apartment to answer her phone. And Tamara said very cheerfully that Stephanie was just in the other room. Hold on. And while I was holding on, I could hear voices in the background. Laughter. What sounded like a dinner party And when Stephanie picked up, her voice had a very specific quality to it. Careful. Like she was choosing each word before she said it. She didn't mention the dinner party. I didn't mention hearing it. We talked for 11 minutes, and when we hung up, I sat very still and thought about that careful voice for a long time. 6 months later, Kevin proposed. I found out from a Facebook post. I am not a foolish woman. I have been alive long enough to understand that when your child gets engaged, there is a certain reorganization that happens, and that the future in-laws often take up more space than the parents of the less wealthy partner. I understood that. I was prepared to be gracious about it, to take what I was given and not ask for more than I was offered. But what I was offered turned out to be very little. I was not asked to join any planning calls. I was not included in the group chat. I know there was one because Stephanie accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for someone else, and I could see the chat name at the top. I was not asked about the date, the venue, the colors, nothing. When I asked my daughter if there was anything I could help with, she said, "I've got it all handled, Mom," in the same careful voice from the phone call. And I said, "Okay." And then the text came. "Please don't make this hard. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what I did next. I am not a vengeful person by nature. I am a person who believes that grace is a choice, and I have chosen it over and over again in my life because I have seen what the alternative does to people. It hollows them out. I did not want to be hollowed out, but I also believe, and this is something I came to very clearly in the days after I got that text, that grace without truth is just silence. And silence, in this particular situation, would have meant letting my daughter walk into a marriage built on a version of herself that wasn't real, a version that didn't include me, a version that, if I let it stand, she would have to maintain for the rest of her life. And I thought about Kevin, who had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye, and who had been told God only knows what. And I thought that he deserved the truth too, even if my daughter had decided he didn't. So I started making calls. The first person I called was my sister Gloria. She is 67 and retired and has known my daughter since the day she was born. I told her what was happening, and there was a long silence on the line. And then she said, "What do you need me to do?" That's the kind of woman my sister is. The second person I called was my old neighbor Ruth, who used to babysit Stephanie after school when I was working a double shift, and who has a memory like a steel trap and a box of photographs in her hall closet that would make your heart ache. Ruth said, "Oh, honey, I've been keeping those for a reason," and I knew she meant it. I also called Stephanie's godmother, Patricia, who has lived 3 streets over from my childhood home for 40 years, and who helped me buy Stephanie's first school uniform when I was short on money and didn't want to ask anyone. And I called my former supervisor from the home health agency, a woman named Cora, who had written Stephanie's character reference for her graduate school application and had never once been thanked for it. These were my people. These were my witnesses. And then I called the one person I wasn't sure would pick up. His name was Mr. Alton Webb. He was a retired accountant I had cared for during the last 8 months of his life, and the connection between him and my daughter was complicated enough that I need to explain it. When Stephanie was a junior in college, she ran into a financial problem. There had been a miscommunication with the financial aid office, a gap in her funding, and she was $3,000 short of what she needed to cover that semester. I didn't have $3,000 liquid. I had savings, but they were in a CD that wouldn't mature for another 4 months, and by that time, the deadline would have passed. I explained the situation to Mr. Webb, who was my patient at the time, and who I had been caring for 5 days a week for almost a year. He offered to cover the gap as a loan, no interest, to be repaid whenever Stephanie was on her feet. I made Stephanie call him herself to say thank you. She did, and she sent him a card. That was all. When Mr. Webb passed, his son contacted me to let me know he had left me something in his will. A small amount, but meaningful to me. His son also told me, and I am still grateful for this, that his father had kept every card he'd ever received from people he'd helped over the years. He had kept Stephanie's. When I called Mr. Webb's son to explain the situation, he said that he had kept his father's papers, and that he remembered my daughter, and that yes, he still had the card, and he said he would come if I needed him to. not to cause harm, just to tell the truth. That's all any of us wanted to do. Tell the truth. The wedding was on a Saturday in April at a church in Dilworth, which is a neighborhood in Charlotte. Nice neighborhood. Old brick buildings and flowering trees and the kind of church that has a parking lot attendant. I wore my navy blue dress. Different one from the graduation. This one I'd bought at dressing room consignment for $14 and had tailored. And if you didn't know, you wouldn't know. Gloria wore her church clothes. Ruth brought her box. We arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to start. I had not told Stephanie I was coming. I want to be honest about that. There was a part of me that considered calling her, giving her a chance to explain herself, maybe even to uninvite me properly to my face. But I knew what would happen. The call would go to voicemail, or she would answer in that careful voice and tell me I was overreacting, and that would be the end of it. So I didn't call. I just came. The coordinator at the door was a young woman with a headset and a clipboard. She asked our names and I told her, and she looked at her clipboard and looked up at me and said, carefully, that she didn't see us on the list. I said, I'm the mother of the bride. She blinked. She said, one moment please, and walked away with her clipboard pressed against her chest, and I could see her speaking quietly into her headset. We waited. My sister stood next to me with her hands folded and her face absolutely serene, the way she gets when she has decided to be unrattleable. Ruth had her box tucked under one arm. Patricia was to my left. Cora to my right. Mr. Webb's son, whose name is Gerald, stood just behind me, very still. We must have looked like something. I don't know exactly what, but something. Kevin came out of a side door. Not Stephanie. Kevin came out of a side door. Not Stephanie. Kevin. He was already in his suit. A dark gray one, with a boutonniere that looked like it cost more than my monthly electric bill. He looked at me, and I could see the recognition on his face from the graduation, just a flicker of it. And then he looked at the group of people behind me, and his expression shifted into something more careful. He said, Mrs. Loretta? I said, Kevin, I'm sorry to do this today. I truly am. But I need to show you some things, and I think you deserve to see them before you make promises you don't yet understand the full context of. He was quiet for a moment. The coordinator hovered. An older man, who I assumed was Kevin's father, appeared in the doorway, and two women who I assumed were Kevin's mother and aunt. They all looked at me. They looked at the box Ruth was holding. Kevin said, Why don't we go somewhere private? We went into a small room off the vestibule, a storage room almost. Folding chairs stacked against the wall, extra programs on a shelf, a box of candles. Not a setting I would have chosen, but it was what we had. I didn't start with the documents. I started with the photographs. Ruth opened her box and laid out pictures on the folding table that someone had pulled out. Stephanie at 9 years old at a kitchen table doing homework, a glass of milk next to her, wearing a t-shirt that said Camp Sunshine because I'd saved up to send her to a week-long day camp that summer, and she had come home from it talking about s'mores for 3 weeks. Stephanie at 12, blowing out birthday candles, a grocery store sheet cake with her name on it in blue frosting, me behind her with my hands on her shoulders, grinning so hard my face looks like it might split in half. Stephanie at 16 in a Wendy's uniform because she had insisted on getting her first job, and I had let her because independence was something I believed in for her even when I didn't need her to work. And she had been so proud of that first paycheck. Kevin looked at each photograph. His mother, who I would later learn was a woman with her own complicated history of sacrifice and love, looked at the photograph of the birthday cake and put one hand over her mouth. I said, I raised my daughter alone. I worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood. I co-signed her student loans. I gave her everything I had to give, which was never a lot, but it was everything. And somewhere along the way, she decided that the story of where she came from wasn't one she wanted to tell anymore. Kevin looked up from the photographs. I said, I am not here to ruin your wedding. I am here because your future wife has been carrying a version of her past that isn't true, and I don't want her to have to keep carrying it, and I don't want you building a life with someone you don't fully know. There was a sound behind me, a sharp intake of breath. and I turned around. Stephanie was standing in the doorway. She was in her dress. Of course she was. It was ivory with a long train, and she had her hair up, and she looked so beautiful that for 1 second I forgot everything. The way you forget everything sometimes when you look at your child, no matter how old they are or what they've done. I just saw my daughter in her wedding dress, and my eyes filled up. She did not look beautiful in that moment, though. She looked terrified. She said, "Mom, what are you doing?" It wasn't a question. I said, "I'm telling the truth, baby. I'm telling the truth because I love you and because I think it's time." She looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at her. And I watched something happen between them in that look. A reckoning. The kind that's been building for a long time and finally has nowhere left to go. She said, "It's not like she's making it sound." Kevin said very quietly, "Steph, is that you in those pictures?" She didn't answer. He said, "Did you tell me your mother passed away when you were in college?" The room got very, very still. Gloria put her hand on my arm. Stephanie said, "You don't understand what it was like, growing up the way we did. I just wanted a fresh start. I wanted people to see me for who I am, not where I came from." Kevin said, "I fell in love with who you are. I never asked where you came from." Gerald Webb spoke then, for the first time since we'd walked into that room. He's a quiet man, mid-40s, accountant like his father, the kind of person who chooses his words the way a careful person chooses a path through wet ground. He said he had come to speak to one matter specifically. He explained who his father was and what his father had done for Stephanie, and that his father had kept her thank you card, and that among his father's papers there were also notes, the kind of careful notes a precise man keeps, showing the repayment of the loan in full, sent in money orders. 11 payments over 9 months, starting when Stephanie was 23. He said, "My father talked about her sometimes. He said she was a girl who was going to go far because she understood that debts have to be honored." He paused. I don't think he meant just the money. Stephanie had started crying somewhere in the middle of that. Not the composed kind. The other kind. Kevin sat down on a folding chair. He didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. His mother had come to stand near him, one hand resting on his shoulder. Then he said, "I need a few minutes. I will tell you what happened, and I will tell you it plainly." Kevin did not leave. He and Stephanie did not get married that day either. They asked for an hour. The guests waited in the church. I am sure it was awkward. I'm sure there was murmuring and confusion and people checking their phones. But they asked for an hour and they got it. During that hour, Stephanie and Kevin's parents sat in that small room and talked. I don't know everything that was said. I was in the vestibule with my sister and my friends, and after a while, Kevin's mother came out and brought us water and sat with us for a few minutes, and we talked. Not about what had happened in the room, just talked. The way women talk when they are waiting for something important, and there's nothing to do but be human in the meantime. Her name was Audrey. She had grown up in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She had worked as a school secretary for 28 years. We had things to say to each other. After the hour, Stephanie came out and asked me to come back in. She looked like she had been crying for all 60 minutes. Her makeup was gone. She had taken her veil off. She was still in the dress, though, and when I walked in and she looked at me, she said, "I told him everything." I said, "Okay." She said, "Everything, Mom. About the apartment, about the loans, about Mr. Webb, about lying to him about you. All of it." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, this gesture so familiar to me from her childhood that it cracked something open in my chest. She said, "He says he still wants to marry me, but he wants to meet you. Really meet you. Not today. He wants to do it right." I said, "That sounds like a reasonable man." She made a sound that was something between a laugh and a sob. I walked to her and I held both of her hands in mine and I looked at her face, my daughter's face, this face I have known since before she had words for anything, and I said, "You never had to be anything other than what you are. Where you came from is not something to be ashamed of. You came from love. That's what you came from." She put her head on my shoulder and cried. I let her. They rescheduled the wedding for 3 months later. I was in the front row. Kevin's mother sat beside me and held my hand during the vows, which I did not expect and which meant more to me than I will be able to articulate for the rest of my life. My sister Gloria gave a toast at the reception that made everyone cry, including Kevin's father, who I now know was also the first person in his family to go to college and who understood something about building yourself out of hard materials. Stephanie danced with me at the reception. We danced to a song my mother used to play in the kitchen on Saturday mornings when I was growing up. I hadn't heard it in years, and when the first notes came on, I looked at my daughter and I said, "How did you know about this song?" And she smiled and said, "Because you used to hum it when you were doing the dishes. I've been listening to it my whole life. I just didn't know I remembered until I heard it." That's the thing about the truth. It's always been there. Sometimes it just needs someone to come to the door and say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm the mother of the bride." It has been 4 months since the wedding. Stephanie calls me every Sunday. We've been on the phone for an hour or more each time, and we talk about her week and my garden and what's on TV. And she told me last week that she and Kevin are thinking about buying a house, a real one, with a yard, and she asked me what I thought about the suburbs of Charlotte, whether I'd ever consider moving somewhere like that, closer to her. I told her I'd think about it. I've been thinking about it. My garden is something, but gardens can be moved. You dig up the roots and you plant them somewhere new, and if you water them right and give them time, they grow. That's what I've learned at 63 years old from all of this. The roots don't go anywhere. They're just waiting for the right soil. And there is always time, almost always, to give them what they need. I've been sitting with all of this for 4 months now, and I keep coming back to one thing. None of what happened to my family was an accident. Not the good parts and not the painful parts either. Stephanie spent years building a wall between who she was and who she wanted people to think she was. And I understand it. I do. I grew up poor too. I know what it feels like to walk into a room and wonder if people can see it on you. The secondhand clothes, the government cheese, the neighborhood you don't name out loud. That shame is real, and it is heavy, and I am not going to stand here and pretend it isn't. But here is what I know at 63 that I didn't fully understand at 34. The wall doesn't protect you. It just moves inside the house. Every lie Stephanie told Kevin about me was a lie she had to maintain. Every dinner party where my name didn't come up was a dinner party where she had to monitor herself. Every time she looked at her own wedding photos, she would have seen a version of her life with a piece missing, and she would have known, even if Kevin didn't, that the piece wasn't gone. It was just hidden. That is not a marriage. That is a performance. And performances are exhausting in a way that slowly empties a person out. What I did by walking into that church was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think that word gets used for things that are really just truth-telling with consequences. I walked in because I loved my daughter enough to refuse to be erased, and because I believed, and still believe, that Kevin deserved to know the woman he was actually marrying. The woman who grew up in a small apartment, who wore a Wendy's uniform at 16 and was proud of it, who had a mother who bought gas station carnations and meant every single one of them. The choices we make have weight. They land somewhere. Stephanie's choices landed on me for years, quietly, in unreturned calls and missed invitations and a text message telling me to watch my child's wedding through a screen. And my choice to not stay silent landed on her wedding day, in a storage room off a church vestibule, in a way neither of us could have planned. Neither outcome was random. Both were the direct result of what came before. What I want anyone to take from my story is this: the truth has a patience that dishonesty never will. You can avoid it for a long time. You can route your whole life around it. But it does not move. It just waits. And the longer you wait to meet it on your own terms, the more likely it is that it will find you on terms you didn't choose. Stephanie is doing the hard work now. She's in therapy. She told me herself, no shame in her voice, which is its own kind of progress. She and Kevin are building something real, which means something that can hold the actual weight of two actual people with actual histories. That is harder than building something pretty, but it is the only kind of thing worth building. I planted a new row of marigolds last week. My neighbor asked me why I was expanding the garden if I was thinking about moving to Charlotte, and I told her the truth. Because the work of tending something isn't wasted just because you might not be the one who sees it bloom. You do it anyway. You show up anyway. That's the whole thing, really. That's all I know how to do.